Hi guys, welcome back to Binge Watch Britney. So in this episode, we're going to be covering The Reign Season 2. So Season 2 is pretty short, it was only 6 episodes, so we're back and ready to do our recap for Season 2. And I almost felt bad for Rasmus this season because obviously he is put in like difficult situations and then he has people who are scared of him, they're trying to help him at the same time, but they're also trying to keep their distance from him. And so obviously I understand that is a very difficult position to be in, but I feel like he was still a little brat, and the brat that he was in season one, because he didn't really understand the severity of the situation he was in, and then also he didn't really appreciate what everyone was doing for him, especially Simone, because she's his blood relative and she is the most committed to making sure that he stays alive and making sure that he stays safe. I know in the last video I was calling him John, but I actually think it's Jen, and then I'm obviously going to just say Simone in this video. But Jen was super annoying because there's something that happened at the end and he just kind of goes crazy for a little bit, but he annoyed me with the facial expressions that he was making, and so I just wanted to go ahead and call that out. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the rest of the season. Alrighty, so the 5 key points of the season. For the first point, the gang needs to get Rasmus to someone who can clear him. So obviously we know that he needed to get away from the Apollon headquarters base, so they escape. And we see them kind of trying to get away from the strangers. At one point, they're confronted, and we see this exchange between Simone and Frederick, her father. And Frederick is under watch at this point. He is in communication with Stan, who's like the main guy, and he really wants Rasmus back under Apollon's thumb. And so we see Frederick and Simone talking, and he's on a short leash at this point, and we see Kira kind of wanting him to wrap up his conversation. He's taking forever, basically. And so we see that they're actually having a side conversation. He's giving her information on how to get Rasmus help. And so he gives her this slip of paper, and it has coordinates on it, and so they're supposed to find that location, and there will be people to help Rasmus and get him cured. So as the gang is traveling to those coordinates, we do see that they are realizing that the ground is covered in some black tar, and we see the tar kind of reacting to Rasmus, and so eventually what we learn is that the tar and Rasmus are basically the virus, is the same thing. And so when they arrive at the coordinates, it's actually a place called the base, and they are trying to burn the tar, and Rasmus has a bad reaction to it, and so they know that something's kind of like connected between the virus on the ground and then Rasmus, and it's kind of enhancing or mutating faster than they can actually follow. And so that is super interesting to see kind of like the virus take on its own life inside of Rasmus and then also obviously outside of him. And one thing that we quickly learn at the base is that Jacob, he is kind of, I guess, the person in charge, and they meet Jacob and I think Fee, and Jacob is willing to kill Rasmus to get the answers, to get the cure that they need, and Fee is not comfortable with lying to them about the risk of everything that they're doing, and so we see them kind of butting heads a little bit over this. We also learn that they are sleeping together, and later on we learn that she is pregnant, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that now. We do learn a little bit more about Jacob as well. He has a sister named Sarah who had a serious illness. I don't think they ever said what it was, or they may have, and I just can't recall the name. But she basically needs to be in a sterile environment. She does walk around with a mask or an oxygen mask or something like that. And we see this really brutal scene of her parents being informed of her illness, and they react in a very strange way, and they make it seem like they are personally more affected by what's happening to her than the daughter is. And so I thought that that was an interesting perspective because you can really see how her parents feel about her. And when it comes to them needing to escape town to get away from the virus, we see them kind of having to go through this checkpoint. And at the checkpoint, they're taking their vitals, and basically they're flagging anybody who's compromised and can't get past the checkpoint. And so we see that Sarah is flagged. She's with her parents and her older brother. Her and her older brother have a great relationship. They're really close, and he's also a little bit older than her. So we see this brutal scene where she's being flagged. She can't get past the checkpoint, and her parents either need to go back with her and find another way to escape the city, or they just need to abandon her. And so they choose to abandon her, and they essentially abandon Sarah and her brother Jacob. And Jacob is really amazing in this scene because he quickly comforts Sarah. He tells her, hey, we'll find another way, and then they kind of just move forward together as a team. And I thought that that was really interesting because obviously the show is dealing with the virus, but then we have another illness kind of being introduced into the show, and just really seeing how Jacob, as a scientist, is taking care of his sister and making sure that she has the best care and all of that stuff. And we kind of saw Frederick doing that with Rasmus at the beginning when he was, I guess, dealing with him being injected with the virus and then kind of upkeeping everything to see how he was progressing or whatever. Obviously, they were experimenting on him, so this was very different from what was happening with Sarah and Jacob, but I did just want to point out those parallels. For the second point, we have Rasmus killing the scientist at the base. And so what we know is that Jacob, they need to get fluid from Rasmus in order to investigate it, examine it, and kind of figure out what they need to do to create the cure. And so they plan to take spinal fluid from Rasmus. He's on the table, he's getting nervous, and he's getting anxious about what they're doing. Jacob is trying to calm him down, and we see Jacob insert the needle into Rasmus's spine to take out the fluid, and we see that the fluid that he's taking out is all black. And so he's alarmed by this because there's supposed to be blood at this point. Instead, it's all black fluid. And so he calls another scientist in to come look at the material that they extracted from Rasmus. And then there's also other scientists in the room. He is not in the room at this point. And so what happens is Rasmus was already kind of getting agitated before they extracted the fluid from him, but he continued to get agitated. And so what happened was he ended up basically, his superpower, the virus, he basically ended up releasing it into the room and killing everybody. And so what happened is Rasmus, he kind of like blacked out. He didn't remember what happened, but Simone came in kind of like at the tail end of everything, saw kind of like the virus hovering around him, and then saw that everyone is dead. And so she kind of understood that Rasmus killed the scientist. What happened at the same time was Sarah saw all of this and she knew that Rasmus was the person who killed everyone. Simone lied to everyone and said that they dropped a sample and that's how they all were killed, which was not accurate. And so Sarah's the only one who can kind of challenge Simone on this, but I do want to point out that no one else is aware of Sarah's existence. We only see her interacting with Jacob. So after this happens, Rasmus needs to be separated from everyone else, and he ends up getting confronted by Sarah over what happened, and then he realizes the truth. We also have Patrick exploring around the base, and he ends up finding another level of the base, and then he finds a room with all of this stuff in it. He finds a electromagnetic gun, I think that's what it's called, and then he also finds old videotapes that basically has information on another group of people trying to figure out how to get the capsules out of their bodies so that they can leave that zone. We also see later on that Kira, someone who is chasing after this group and trying to capture Rasmus, she has an accomplice, Dennis, break into the base so that they can get all of that material back. And we do see a fight between Patrick and Dennis over the gun, the electromagnetic gun, and then the videotapes. And so this is how Patrick is able to find the videotapes, and he watches it and then learns all of the information that is on the tapes. And so what we learned from this is that Kira was part of the group of people who were given the capsules, they couldn't leave, and so her mother was part of that group as well. They were trying to figure out how to extract the capsules. They were torturing people for information. They were using the gun on people to extract the capsules, and so we see that she wasn't always with the strangers. We also have the gang continuing to work on a cure for Rasmus, and we see that they're testing on lab rats. We also have, at this moment, the gang kind of really understanding what actually happened in the room with Rasmus and the other scientists. So it comes out that he actually killed them. It wasn't that they just dropped a sample. Simone lied to them, and so Martin, Leah, and everyone else, Fee included, they all have a really strong and negative reaction to this. They essentially lose faith in Simone, and we really see this kind of played up more with Leah because in the previous season she had talked about Simone being her guiding star, her guiding light, and so now we see that she's lost this sort of inspiration, this kind of like person that she's put up on a pedestal, and she's kind of having to deal with all of those internal feelings of knowing that this person that she trusted so much lied to her. And so as a result, we have Martin and Fee wanting to turn Rasmus in once they find out what he did. And I just talked about Leah losing her guiding star, so we really have the group fractured at this point. But one thing I do want to highlight is that Leah and Jen, they want to leave once all of this news breaks, and Leah is all set to go, but then when she learns that Martin and Fee want to turn Rasmus in, she immediately is on Simone's side and she wants to go and find her because she knows that this is a huge thing for Simone. She would never turn her brother in because she's fought so hard to protect him all this time up until now. And then while all of this is happening, I can't recall what exactly led to this, but Rasmus and Sarah decide to run away and they want to go to Bakken, which is a amusement park. And during this kind of moment of the season, we learn, as I mentioned, that Fee is pregnant. Martin, Fee, and Simone are confronted by Klaus when they are looking for Rasmus and Sarah. Klaus is Joanne's partner. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly, but this was the couple that basically tried to get Martin and Simone drunk so that they could turn them in to find Rasmus. And so Klaus obviously survived that ordeal, and here he is holding them at gunpoint, and he wants to find Rasmus and kill him because he's upset about his partner. And we have Martin kind of getting himself on Klaus's side. At this point, Martin, Fee, and Simone are tied up. Martin is able to convince Klaus to free him, and he'll help him look for Rasmus. And then we do see this moment where Simone and Fee, they end up at Bakken. They are calling out for Rasmus, and then we do see that Klaus kind of holds Simone at gunpoint, and then we have Fee showing up with a gun, and so they're able to overpower Klaus and get back to the base. With all of this happening, we have Martin and Simone breaking up because of all of this chaoticness with the tooth coming out and then everything with Rasmus running away and all of this stuff. And so obviously Simone's first loyalty is to her brother. She wants to protect him. And so we see this moment between Martin and Simone where they break up, and he's obviously is not for it, but she's really pushing like, hey, we don't belong together, we don't work together. And so this leads to Martin and Patrick abandoning the group. So for the third point, we have Leah is killed. So Simone is super desperate and she is continuing to work on a cure. Fee is kind of frustrated at this point. She doesn't think that anything is going to come of what they're doing, but Simone actually figures out that there's two controller genes or something like that, and so everything that they were doing before to try to find a cure wasn't working because they didn't realize that there's two controller genes. I'm not even sure what that means, but that makes a huge difference in their efforts to create a cure. And so we obviously have Rasmus and Sarah continuing to develop their relationship. And then we also see that Rasmus is having hallucination and he's seeing his younger self. And so we're seeing flashbacks of conversations that he had with Stan about his condition, his virus. And so we see the scene where Rasmus is in a hospital bed, his father and Stan are having a conversation, and then Stan comes over and says, hey, I know you are awake and you heard us, and then they're just kind of talking about his condition, the virus, and all of that, and how powerful he is and that he's the future. And so Rasmus is really struggling with these hallucinations. He wants to get the virus out of him, and so what he does try to do is prematurely inject the virus into himself, but he doesn't use enough, and so basically it doesn't work. And so because of this, he ends up having a conversation with Sarah, and he becomes really wishy-washy on whether or not he should take the cure because he initially wanted to fight the virus, but then he had a conversation with Fee and Simone where they were basically telling him that the virus is taking over him and it's making him feel a certain way, but those feelings aren't real. And so because he's feeling the feelings, he feels like they don't actually fully understand what he's going through. And so he feels like, at this point, no, I should not take the cure. And so what happens is Simone ends up drugging Rasmus so that they can inject him with the cure. They have him strapped down on the table, and he gets really angry by this. And what happens is the virus takes over to defend himself and kind of like expels from his body. So you can see like the black cloud hovering over his body when he gets angry, when he gets like this. And so this is very much similar to what happened when he was in the room with the scientist. And so Simone is still trying to inject him, and so the cloud is kind of shifting to Simone. Leah and Jen are outside of the room. They're safe, but Leah sees what's happening, and she says her goodbyes to Jen, and then she goes into the room. She steps into the cloud and takes over her and kills her. And so obviously Leah sacrificed herself in order to save Simone, and Simone was able to inject Rasmus with the cure. And going into the fourth point, Martin and Patrick discover that the cure will only make the virus worse. And so, as I mentioned before, Martin and Patrick decided to go off on their own. They left the group, and where they were going was to another lab that will have the equipment that they needed to extract the capsules so that they could leave the area. And so they do discover this lab, and there's a scientist who is doing testing, and they find this man who's severely deformed. His legs are basically turned into the virus, so he doesn't even have legs. He's in extreme pain, and there's this scientist who's basically on autopilot, kind of like working on the guy's body, and he injects him with something, and they have like 2 minutes, I guess, to see what will happen. And so at this point, Martin and Patrick are locked in a room with that scientist and with that deformed person. And so they know that they need to get out of the room, so they're trying to get the scientist to let them out. They have to basically physically force him to put his palm print on the machine so that I could read the handprint and open the door and let them out. And then once they get out, you see that the guy dies, and then the room is basically covered in an explosion of the guy's body. And so if they had not been able to get out, they would have been covered in all of that stuff, and then they would have died shortly after because they were exposed to the virus. What happens is they end up having a conversation with the scientist. He basically tells them that the cure or everything that they're doing just makes the virus more aggressive, it makes it mutate, and so they are understanding that this is a huge problem, and they want to get back to the base so that they can tell everybody what they have learned. At the same time that all of this is happening, we have the strangers kind of rallying people and recruiting them to look for Rasmus. And so we see 2 women. They were captured with Martin and Patrick nearby in like a greenhouse, and we see them having this conversation. Sten is on a platform on a stage, and he's addressing the group, and he's saying, hey, we're looking for Rasmus. He's secure, he's the future, find him, and if you are the first person to find him, we'll take the capsules out of you and you're free to leave the zone. And so everyone is motivated by this. I do want to mention, just to make it crystal clear, Martin and Patrick do not overhear this. They just know that the 2 women were taken by the strangers. They didn't see what happened after. And so as they're on their way back, Patrick gets injured, so they stop for a little bit, and then they are trying to go, and then they have like the drone kind of discovering where they are, and then they are captured by the strangers, and they are taken to Sten's trailer. And so Martin is quick to figure out that Sten actually doesn't have plans to cure Rasmus. He wants to use him for other means. And so he realizes that the cure obviously is not going to cure Rasmus, it's just going to make the virus more aggressive. And then Sten says something to the effect of they will all just have to learn how to live with the virus, and they can do that through Rasmus. And so at this point, Kira is supposed to kill Martin and Patrick, but she ends up taking them somewhere else in the forest, and they are actually making their way back to the base so that they can save his friends. And we know that Kira obviously has dual interests. She's obviously working with the strangers to protect herself. We do see this flashback scene of when she shot her mother, and that was done so that she could make the strangers think that she was on their side and obviously save her own life. And so we also saw this moment where she sent Dennis into the base to get rid of the evidence that showed that they had ulterior motives as far as what they were doing at the base. This all leads me into my fifth point: Sarah is killed. So we have Martin and Patrick and Kira making their way back to the base. They realize that the base is being overwhelmed by all those people who were recruited to look for Rasmus. While all of this is happening, we do see this moment where the 2 women that Martin and Patrick saw being taken by the strangers, they are at the base. They confront Jen, and he tells them where Rasmus is. They try to take Rasmus at gunpoint with Sarah, and they are able to basically trick them into thinking that Rasmus is having a seizure. They flee because they don't want to get infected or whatever, and so they're able to fool them and make their escape so that they are not taken to the Apollon people. So what this means is that Jen was betraying the group and giving up Rasmus because he wanted to avenge Leah, and he was really heartbroken over the way that she died and the reason that she died to protect Simone and Rasmus. So once Martin and Kira make it inside the base, they hear Jen over the intercom system. He is basically directing them to find Rasmus. Obviously, Martin has no idea what has happened, and Jen tells him that Leah was killed, that Rasmus killed Leah. And so we have him basically locked up in the control room, so they can't really get to him. They can hear him, but there is a door, security door, that is separating them. And so Martin goes off to find Rasmus, and he and Simone make up, and then he brings the rest of the group down to that second layer where the control room is, so that they can make their escape through the second entrance that Kira is aware from obviously having worked out of the base, as we saw in the flashbacks. So once the whole group is there by the control room, Martin is really trying to convince and get through to Jen that he's not doing the right thing. He ends up setting off an alarm that basically overwhelmed him with the loud noise. We saw this alarm being used when Patrick and Dennis were fighting, and this basically knocked them out. I don't know why Dennis was killed, but Patrick obviously was able to survive hearing that loud noise or whatever. And so we see Jen using that, and he is able to overwhelm them with the noise, but they are also able to keep moving and kind of get out of the base. I don't know why that is. But then we see this moment where Jen is reacting to that noise. He sits down at the monitors basically, and he sees a vision of Leah or whatever on the screen, and she's basically telling him not to go through with his plan to betray the group and kill Rasmus. And so we see him realizing what he's done, and he goes to hit the buzzer, and I don't know if he actually is stopping the noise, but he's really understanding that what he's doing is not right, and he's trying to like basically run away from everything. And so we see him open the door and run out of the control room. The strangers are coming and he hides, and then he kind of runs off, and we don't really know what happens to him. The next thing that we have happening is Sarah gets shot and she dies. And so what happens with this is she got shot while they were trying to escape because the strangers caught up to them, and everyone else was able to get kind of like around the corner and hide from the gunshots, but she for whatever reason didn't make it, and so she gets shot. Rasmus stops and tries to help her. They can't save her, and so he ends up going crazy, and he basically reactivates the virus. So he was cured, and now he's not cured anymore. And we see him just going on a crazy spiral. The virus is kind of expelling from him, and he's killing everything in his path. And we see him attacking all of those people who were recruited to look for him. And he makes his way to this like garage area where these cars are parked, and this is where he has a confrontation with Simone. And so Simone confronts him, and she tries to get him to calm down. She says, you know, what have you done? And she's really trying to understand why he's acting like this. Obviously he's upset because Sarah has died, but he's become a monster at this point where he's taken out his rage on everyone, and he's killed innocent people who were manipulated into looking for him. And so we see that Simone earlier in the season had this moment where she let Fee know that she was really hell-bent on finding a cure, because as her father Frederick said, if they can't cure Rasmus, they need to kill him. And so we see her trying to get through to Rasmus. She can't. She ends up picking up a gun and she points it at him. This obviously sets Rasmus off, and we see the virus again expelling from his body. Martin comes onto the scene, and he's basically trying to distract Rasmus and draw his attention to him and get it off of Simone because the virus is moving towards her. And so what happens is the virus starts moving towards Martin, and he really wants to attack him, and so Simone shoots him to save Martin. What we do see happening after she shoots him is he realizes that she has shot him, and this kind of really fractures the relationship because he can't believe that she did this. And then we see his gunshot wound healing, and then he kind of walks off. And so what we see from this point is we see Rasmus walking towards Sten, and we kind of see that they are going to link up, they're going to team up, and we have no idea what Rasmus is going to do next. We also see that they have moved Sarah's body outside, and she's laying on this table, and then we see kind of like it go to a close-up, and we see her body, her veins turning black, and then she opens her eyes. And so what we see from this is that she is basically just like Rasmus. They did kiss just before she died, and so I don't know if he transmuted his version of the virus to her. She died, and then we see her waking up with the virus, and so that is where season 2 has ended. So to go ahead and wrap up this video, I'm really super excited for season 3 because this is an interesting ending for season 2. I clearly have no idea what's going to happen. Rasmus is clearly in his villain era. We have no idea what he's going to do in season 3, and so I'm really excited to see that. Obviously, Simone and Martin are back together, and so I hope they stay that way and they team up and really get Rasmus back to the good side. And I'm not sure what will happen with Jen, but I hope he is welcomed back to the group. I hope he tries to make amends to the group for what he did. And then I'm not sure what will happen with Sarah, because obviously if she's like Rasmus, she's kind of a person who can be used as a lab rat by the Apollon people. And I'm not sure how that's going to change her relationship with Rasmus, if they're the same. Obviously, she should be able to live a different life than she was living before, because she shouldn't need this harsh restriction because of her illness, as far as needing to be in sterile environments and everything like that. And so hopefully her life is a little bit different, but hopefully they can do everything for her that they couldn't do for Rasmus, and so I really hope that they have different outcomes. I won't be surprised if they end up giving her the cure, like a better version of it, and kind of getting the virus out of her, but I have no clue what is next for Rasmus. And so yeah, I'm really excited for season 3. And with all that being said, thank you so much for listening to this video, and I'll see you in the next one.